Hi, my name is Dennis. Welcome to A Minute in the 1970s. And today I'm going to talk about one of the things that I miss the most of the 1970s, one of my favorite things about the 1970s. And that's exemplified by this picture. It's just a picture of ordinary folk. There's not anything particularly special about them. They're not famous or anything. However, if you know something about them, there are things that are special about them, things that you could find then that you can't find today. Like start with the fellow with the in the hat here, who's standing here with his wife. He's a veteran of the First World War. He was in the United States Army during the war, and here's a shot of him in camp during the war. It looks like you can see the tents in the background. He's much younger, obviously, and it looks like he's writing and has a couple of inkwells in front of him. But that's what's interesting about him. He was born in 1889, so he was a youngster in the latter part of the 19th century, and an adult during the First World War. And so that was one of the things that was interesting about living in the 1970s, is you could speak and have a conversation with a World War One veteran. He was getting rather elderly, but he was still lucid and totally conversant, and you could sit and talk about his experiences. The other folks are about as exceptional, and that is the fellow over on the right of the photo with the big crease going through him. He was born in 1900, so he's seen the entire sweep of history from the for the first 70 years of the 20th century by this point. So he and all of them really, and the fellow over on the left was born in 1928. So he is actually of the age of the World War II era. So we have people here who've seen the entire sweep of history firsthand of the 20th century up till the time this photo was taken in the early 1970s. They'd seen the Roaring Twenties. They'd seen World War One. They'd lived through the Great Depression. They'd lived through World War Two. The fellow on the left, who is World War Two age, actually was considered ineligible to serve because he only had one eye. You can't tell it from this picture, but he only has one eye, and therefore was not drafted or acceptable during the war. But he lived the 1940s experience just like everybody else. And they experienced the prosperity of the 1950s and the turmoil of the 1960s. And here they are in the 1970s in what must have seemed like an alien world to them. So much was changing socially and technologically in the 1970s. Computing was just beginning. Electronics were becoming more amazing. I remember these people, when some of them were young, you didn't have electricity in your house. You had a horse and carriage until sometime until the 1920s or 1930s. You didn't have These folks did not have indoor plumbing for a long time. A lot of the things that make life easy, they didn't have. And this is what I miss most about the 1970s, is you could sit and have a conversation with people who've seen a sweep of history that was just phenomenal in terms of world and United States history, with major, huge events that were just, to them were just, life. It was just what was going on. But looking back historically, there were just phenomenal events, which I wish now I could sit and discuss with them. But of course I can't, because all of them have passed on. The fellow on the right passed on in 1977, eventually from Alzheimer's disease. The fellow in the center actually lived all the way into the 1980s. He was, I think, around more than 100 years old when he passed away. And the fellow on the right, who was born in 1928, passed away in 1997. And the other thing that makes these folks special is this fellow on the left is my dad, and the fellow way over on the right is his dad, who was born in 1900. And the couple in the middle is my great grandfather on my father's mother's side and his wife at the time. So this is three generations of my family, all gone, which I so wish I could talk to. But this is one of the things that made the 1970s special, that I wish I could revisit, because I was so young at the time that I really couldn't grasp the sweep of history that they had seen, that they had experienced. Although today I can, but now they're not around to be a primary source, to be a first-person experience to talk to. So that's this 1970s Minute.